My name is Adam Greco, and I am a product evangelist for a digital analytics company called Amplitude. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about product-led growth and some of its impact on marketing. So just so you know where I'm coming from, my background, I've spent the last 20 years in digital marketing and the last year and a half in this new world of product when I joined Amplitude. I mainly spend a lot of my time in the analytics space, but I've been through hundreds of different companies as I consulted with them on digital marketing. And we're going through a little bit of a weird kind of shift right now in the marketing world. So what I'm going to cover today is kind of where we've been in marketing, where we're going, and why product-led growth is something that you need to know about. I'm just curious, how many of you, I assume most of you have heard of product-led growth at some point? So what I'm going to do is kind of go a little deeper into product-led growth and why it's changing marketing. So before I do that, let's kind of just do a recap of maybe 60 or 70 years in about 2 minutes of marketing. So if you think about marketing in the old days, there was basically print advertising, magazines, classified ads. Then you ended up in the world where we got into this media world where we had, maybe when I was young, 3 or 4 TV channels, and then kind of blew up to now there's like millions of TV channels. But basically you had a TV way to get in front of people, but you had no idea who you were talking to. It was very branding focused. Then we ended up in the 90s in this world where we finally got to the digital world and we got to email. And email was actually a huge revolution for those of you who are on the younger side and don't remember when email first came out. This was actually the first time marketers could communicate one-on-one with someone. And it was pretty revolutionary. Well, then the internet kind of exploded, and we as marketers basically screwed up the internet by putting pop-up ads and display ads all over the internet. And it was kind of a little bit of a mess. And then we found ourselves when Google came out with paid search. And now we had a venue where we could know what people were looking for, and we could basically position our products and services with those customers. But once people clicked on these paid search ads, we had to have a place to send them. And so that's when the website was born. And when the website basically became this place that you could control the message that you were sending to people. And it was like having a salesperson or a marketing team that was online 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And this was a huge revolution, and marketing basically took over the ownership of the website. They started with just PDF brochures, but then they got more interactive. And it got to the point where websites could, if you're a B2B company, you could have pricing there. If you're a B2C company, you could talk about how they can learn more about your products and all the cool stuff your company does. But then websites weren't enough in marketing. We were having a hard time. It got saturated. So marketing took it to the next level where we basically said, we need to move into content marketing. We need to start doing blog posts and white papers and find ways to give them useful content so that they will think highly of our brand and then want to buy our products. And then that wasn't enough. So then we got to the point where we had to participate in communities and social media, and we had to be part of conversations with our customers. And so if you think about the way that marketing evolved over the last 100 years or so, we had basically very few channels. We got a couple more channels each decade. And we got to the point now where it seems like all we're doing is spamming people, and we're basically just in front of them everywhere we could possibly be in front of them. But there's some challenges that with where we're at with marketing, and I hate to be like the doomsday person, but I think marketing and digital marketing is really running into a tough time right now. And the first challenge we're running into is just that people are bombarded with messages because it seems like everyone is trying to target the same consumers. And so it's like walking in New York Times Square all the time, just being bombarded. And they say that people view, 1,000 messages a day from marketing. In the digital world, we're running into the problem where we used to be able to kind of know if we're hitting the same people over and over by using cookies. And that is now being taken away from us because people and browsers are deleting cookies. I don't really believe Chrome is ever going to change, but they claim that they're going to officially get rid of third-party cookies at some point, but that only hurts Google, so I don't really see them doing that. But basically, cookie deletion is making it harder to know what is the actual return on our ad spend for our marketing, and is it having an impact? Obviously, you've all heard of GDPR and the regulations that are going on. So this makes it even more difficult because we don't have the consent in many cases to track the marketing activities we're doing. And most people don't want to be tracked. When Apple basically gave people the opportunity, I think only 4% of the people said they're okay being tracked. So basically, we're in this world where all we're doing is yelling at people and they're tuning us out. So how do we deal with that? From a financial standpoint, there's another problem. You can spend as much as you want to market to people, but if you ever stop spending, you're going to dry up either if you're in B2B, if it's new leads you're looking for, or if it's B2C, new customers, that's going to disappear. It's not like you could spend money on paid search or display ads for a year and say, okay, we got everyone, we're done, we're going to stop buying that. It's like something you have to keep paying like the rent. And there's not a compounding effect. It's not like if you advertise on paid search for 2 years, suddenly you get better returns on year 3 and year 4. It's basically you're just buying customers. And that doesn't scale. Now, of course, when the world went to mobile apps, everything changed again because now people weren't going to the web. They weren't going to websites. I have kids who are in college and they think it's funny. They think I'm a boomer that I go to a website. They're like, Dad, there's an app for everything. I just do everything in an app. They don't even use Safari. They think it's weird. They're like, that's an old person's thing to do. Because there's just millions and millions of apps out there, as you all know, and this is the way that people want to be communicated with. And the way that I explained it, I had a crazy thing because I'm in tech, so I had to explain to my family, what's going on. Try explaining digital transformation to old people. So the way I explained it to them is I said, okay, remember Mom, Dad, when you used to go to a bank? They're like, yeah, I went to a bank every week. Well, then the bank had a website where you could log in and you could see what's going on in your bank account. Well, then that disappeared, basically was replaced by your mobile app. And now you check your balance in your mobile app. And they're like, okay, I'm kind of getting used to that. Well, now I show them that they could take a picture of any check they receive and deposit it in their phone. And they're like, oh, okay, that's cool. And eventually I say to them, when was the last time you went to the bank? And they're like, it's funny you say that. I haven't gone to the bank in 6 months. We basically are now having the most interactions with our customers through the mobile app. And I asked my son who's in college, I said, how do your friends pick a bank? And he's like, well, we just ask around. And they're always like, who's got the best app? Whose app makes sense to them? And it just spreads by word of mouth. And that's just this new world that we're in, and how do marketers deal with it? So we also have this weird situation where some companies, they only exist because of the mobile phone. Trust me, you are never going to use Uber sitting at home on a PC and saying, I'm going to order an Uber and then run down to the corner and try to catch it. It only makes sense if you have a mobile phone. And one of our clients at Amplitude is Peloton. And I love Peloton, it's really cool, but their bikes are not that different than the bikes that have been around for 100 years. The thing that makes it different is the digital experience and the app that is embedded that gets you hooked with the music and the trainers and the people that motivate you. So in many cases, the app is becoming the business, but for the banks and others, the app becomes a new business for them. So if you think about it, banks have their normal business they've had for a couple hundred years, but now they have a second business. They have to run a mobile app. And that becomes the main interface. And so kind of traditional old brick and mortar companies are really struggling with this because they have to deal with their own business and this mobile app, and they're not tech people. So what's interesting is in marketing, we've always known that the best way to be a good marketer is to listen to your customer and to listen to your needs of your customer. But how do you listen to your customer when you don't meet them face to face anymore, when they don't go into a store or they don't communicate with you through the phone? Now we have to learn a new skill, which is listening to customers by the swipes and clicks that they make in the app. And that's really been a weird transformation for a lot of companies. Now, the marketing team used to run the website, but most marketing teams are not involved in the mobile app. I'm not going to put anyone on the spot, but if I asked you, do you know the key metrics that are happening within your mobile app? Most marketers don't. They can tell you the return on ad spend of their paid search, but they don't really know what's happening in the mobile app because guess who owns the mobile app? It's the product team. The product team at your organization builds the mobile app. And they use products like Amplitudes to listen to customers. So they might look at it and say, we know which features in our app people are using. But oftentimes the product team and the marketing team don't ever talk to each other. The product team also knows how often they're coming back to your app. They know retention, and they can see when they're dropping off or if they're not being loyal to the mobile app. The product team can actually see step by step how people are using the mobile app and what are the different things they're doing and get in the heads of your consumers. So in this new world that we're in, the product team and understanding what happens in your app is the closest you can come to listening to your customers and making your app better. Because I don't think any of your customers are calling up your business and saying, I was using your app the other day and I didn't like this or I didn't like that. You have to implicitly imply it through data, which is why all of you, if you're all marketers, which I assume you are, like me, have to make a transition in your career to start learning how to interpret signals through data. And that's why at Amplitude, like we've ridden this wave of product being the way that customers are listening to their customers. And it's just been kind of a crazy little wave. But the hardest thing, and the last thing I'll say before I dive into the core topic of product-led growth, is that your organization has a challenge ahead of it. Every dollar is being scrutinized right now. And you have to decide, do you want to spend money on marketing, like more paid search, display ads, email, or do you want to invest your money into the product? And I'm going to explain for the rest of this talk why many organizations are starting to decide to cut back on marketing spend and spend more on their product. That's where we've gotten to, and that's why product-led growth has become such a hot trend. So what is product-led growth? I feel like nowadays it's obligatory in your presentation to have something with ChatGPT. So I saw that someone put this on ChatGPT where they said, how do you explain product-led growth? And he actually asked ChatGPT to do it at a couple levels, the kid level, the high school level, and the more graduate level. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but at the kid level, I always say product-led growth is like when you used to go to a candy store and you were a kid and the owner of the candy store would give you a piece of candy and then you were hooked and then you would scream at your parents like you have to have a bag of that candy. That was the initial product-led growth. Or think of it as, a toy and then a kid likes a toy, tells all his friends, and now everyone wants that toy. Now, it gets a little more advanced when you think about product-led growth in the perspective of maybe a high schooler. And basically this is saying, hey, you're going to use word of mouth around your product or your app to get more people to use your product and app. But what I like to think about it is more at the college professor level, which is really, this is a new marketing strategy. And it's a strategy that says we're not going to use as many sales and we're not going to use as much marketing and we're going to lean on the product to drive more of our business because it's the most efficient way to do that. And I'm going to get into details of why that is the case. So product-led growth is basically a go-to-market strategy for an app that says we're going to let people try our product, and it's not just physical products or apps, it's also services. It could be any type of product. And we're going to basically get them to try it, and they're going to kind of play around with it before they make a buying decision. And then ultimately, we're going to use the app and the people using the app to grow our business. Now, product-led growth does not mean that the product team is taking over the company. It doesn't mean that the chief product officer is now the CEO. And it doesn't mean that the CMO is non-existent. There's going to be sales, there's going to be marketing. It just means that you're putting more of an emphasis on the product. Now, many of you, if you're marketers, for years have been taught that everything in marketing has to do with conversion funnels. Now, conversion funnels are great. I've loved them for years, but they're going away. And the idea of a conversion funnel is you just flood the market, you get as many people in. Obviously, you're going to lose people along the way, but you try to get enough at the bottom, and you try to plug as many leaks as you can in the funnel. But product-led growth has a different mindset that doesn't think about funnels. It thinks about loops. And it says, how do you build an ever better product or an ever better strategy? And I'm going to spend some time going through loops. But the idea of these product-led growth loops is that you're delivering value immediately. People don't have to wait. Like if you were to buy a SAP from a B2B standpoint, Like, you can't just try SAP. Like, it's a multi-million-dollar product. You just commit to it, and then the first time you're using is after you've committed millions of dollars. But young people, they don't buy that anymore. They're like, I want to try something before I give any of my money. And they have expectations that they can try something basically for free because they've been brought up on free email, free social media, free everything. But they want to get value right away. And if you give them value, then they will reward you potentially with money. So how does this work? So the way that loops for product-led growth work is you start with acquisition. And this is basically one way or another they hear about your app. And that could be through a friend, it could be through marketing, it could be through sales, but they basically have some sort of curiosity about, I want to try this. Then they use your app and they have this aha moment. So for Uber, it might be, hey, I'm used to taking, black cabs, but it's raining, I don't see a cab here, and I've heard about Uber, and I try it, and now someone shows up in 3 minutes. That's my aha moment. I think Uber could be something I want to use over and over again. So then you get value. So you get in the Uber, and you're like, okay, I got where I needed to go. I don't have to have any, have to pay with pounds. It's just all on my credit card. This is easy. I now have gotten value. So now I've been activated in the product-led growth vernacular. But that's not enough. You're not going to make me a habitual user of your app right away. You need to have the next step, which is to build a trigger. There has to be reasons to get me back over and over again. So maybe Uber might ping me and say, hey, I see you're going here. Do you want an Uber? Or we also deliver food. Like, there's got to be something that gets you to come back over and over so that suddenly I use Uber. It's like in my daily or weekly pattern. Now, once you get that value exchange, then you're kind of hooked from a product-led growth standpoint. And that's when you start telling your friends about it, or you start telling your colleagues, and that's when you close the loop where then they tell people about your app or product, and now the whole thing goes over and over again. So let's look at this in a real-world scenario. Many of you have used and heard of Spotify. So let's think about how this worked for Spotify. So let's say my wife, she's a big fan of Tay-Tay, can't get enough Taylor Swift. So she basically says, I want to go listen to Taylor Swift. I don't want to spend a fortune. And she hears about Spotify. So she goes there. So she creates her favorite, Taylor Swift Spotify playlist. Then she gets annoyed by all the ads, as we all do. So she pays money to get rid of all the ads. Then she starts going back and forth, and then Spotify says, hey, if you like Tay-Tay, here's another set of artists that you're gonna like. She adds them to her playlist, and then she shares her playlist with 5 of her friends. Then they love that playlist, they go try out Spotify, they get annoyed by the ads, and they pay, and the whole thing keeps going over and over again. So this is kind of the product-led growth. Now you notice that none of this had to do with marketing. This was the product that was doing all of the work here to get this cycle. Okay? Now, this sounds super easy, but the hardest part is getting people to know about your app and then be enough to the point where they get an aha moment, which is why you need to deliver value as soon as possible. Now, another thing that's really important in this cycle is learning and growing from the people that are using your app. So the way I kind of think about this is that there's kind of like the faster you grow, the more compounding you get out of product-led growth. So there's a lot of different companies that basically can go through here. You've got growth where you're slowly growing, where you're more rapidly growing, or where it's kind of more like a hockey stick. The faster you give value, the more input, the more data you get about how users are using your app, the more you improve it, the more you can have that compounding effect. And if you do this right, it can be really lucrative. Now, we're not all going to be, Airbnb and Netflix, but it can be super lucrative, but you have to get over that threshold because there's so many apps that people try, they never stick with it. But if you get to the other side of it, these are companies that don't spend a lot on advertising and marketing, and they're able to continue to grow at high clips. So you may not do it at that scale, but in your niche market, you could still do it at that scale. Now, I also look at the market in this kind of way where there's a cost to marketing. It costs a lot of money to buy Google keywords. It gets more expensive all the time. But then there's this desire you have for growth. Now, there's some companies that just don't really care about growth. They have a monopoly. They're a non-profit. They don't have much competition. Now, there's also companies that are sales-led, and they're basically say all salespeople. Now, this is not a great strategy long-term because salespeople are very expensive, and there's only so many accounts that they can get to. So you have a low-growth, high-cost model. Now, you also have marketing-led, which is what we've all been used to. Marketing is not cheap. So marketing can bring you a lot of growth, but you got to pay a heck of a lot of money for it. And where most companies are now going towards is product-led growth because it scales and it doesn't cost that much money. So you could basically get a lot of growth with less impact. Now, you're probably going to end up doing a mixture of these, but just to illustrate some of the companies that you might want to think about in each of these quadrants, I pulled a couple logos in here. So if you think about the bottom one, you know, BP, they have a monopoly, Royal Mail, TfL, like they may spend a little bit on marketing, but they have you. There's nothing they need to do. Now, you've got things like Adobe, SAP, Oracle. They're heavy sales. Like they may do a little bit of marketing, but they're out there. They have salespeople, hundreds of salespeople. Then you've got your marketing led, which is kind of British Airways, IBM. Like they do tons of marketing, but they don't have a lot of salespeople. And then you've got kind of your product-led growth. Like we're a big product-led growth company. I'm going to talk a little bit about Calendly and Slack. Those are kind of like the poster childs of product-led growth that don't have to spend a lot, but they can get high growth. And most companies are going to be a little bit of a mixture. So like our company, I would say that we're a little bit sales, a decent amount marketing, but probably half of what we do is product-led. 80% of the people who use Amplitude's analytics products don't pay us a dime. We give it away for free because eventually they grow. A small company used our free product many years ago called BeReal. And they basically just used our free product and now they're one of our highest paying customers and we're happy that they did well and we're happy that all startups do well because they end up paying us after they use us for free. But if you look at like an Oracle, they're probably barely doing product-led growth. They're doing mainly sales and mainly marketing. So you have to think at your organization, what is your mix and how do you want to allocate your money? So now let's go into the two biggest business models, B2B, and then I'll cover B2C. How does B2B work for product-led growth? So with B2B, in the 80s and 90s, we basically were in this, what we call the sales-led era. This was where before websites, it was all salespeople calling people. If you wanted to sell your product, you were basically taking people to steak dinners and taking them golfing. That was the old way of doing marketing. Then we moved to the marketing-led era where everything went digital. It was all about email. It was all about display ads, paid search, and so on. And this is where the CMO became really powerful. And all of you probably report up to the CMO. Now we're moving into the product-led era where it's your users and end users who are deciding what products your business is going to use. I promise you that 10 years ago, no CIO or CMO went into the company and said, I think we need a new instant messaging app that all of our employees can use, and we need Slack. It didn't happen that way. One person used Slack, then they got another person, and eventually there were 100 people at a company using Slack, and then the CIO or the CTO had to say, what the heck's going on here? I need to do something about this because they're sharing all of our information in this tool. I need to lock it down and put some money behind it. So it basically worked from the bottom up. And that's the world that we're in now, is people are using apps and then eventually the company agrees with their own customer employees that they should use it. And this is why Slack kind of hockey sticked and became one of the fastest growing apps in the marketplace. And this is really kind of the poster child for product-led growth. Now, some of you may have heard of Calendly. If you've ever gotten that annoying link where someone says, hey, here's my link, book a meeting with me. It seems annoying, but this is probably one of the fastest growing apps out there. And it's really viral because you give someone that link and then they start thinking about how they want to book meetings with other people. And the way it works is that you get it and then you basically say, okay, well now I'll try it for free and I'll let someone book meetings with me, and then it keeps going and going and going. And they don't spend any money on marketing. And they are probably one of the biggest B2B companies in the marketplace right now. Now let's talk about B2C. So if you're in the B2C world, say like a Starbucks, you have to decide, do I want to spend my money on display ads, paid search, SEO, or do I want to spend it on the Starbucks app? Well, I can tell you from firsthand experience that my wife is a big Starbucks fan, but she used to go to Starbucks maybe once a week. She now has the app, and it has her favorite coffee. It alerts her when she's near a Starbucks, and she pushes a button, and it basically, she just walks in, skips the line, and the coffee's just waiting there. She has quadrupled the amount of money that she has spent at Starbucks, I can tell you, over the last couple of years. So if you're Starbucks, are you buying Google keywords for coffee or anything like that? Like, that's a waste. You probably want to plow all of your money into the app. And this is scary because that means that if you were a marketer at Starbucks, your job might be eliminated because all the budget might go away. And my wife's kind of growth model, if we go back to the loop I showed earlier, was, hey, I get the app, I'm in the store and I see a QR code, so I download the app, I save my favorite coffee, I get to skip the line, that's a nice value. Then I get a trigger to notify me that I'm near a store. And now my wife has gotten to the point that she loves the Starbucks app so much that all of my nieces and nephews, for all of their birthdays, she sends them a gift card, which then just plugs them into this loop and it never ends. But that's basically product-led growth, okay? Now, this can also apply to physical products. So one of the companies, I was in Copenhagen last week, and IKEA, they have a really popular app that allows you to see furniture that they sell within your house by just using kind of AR. Now, it's not like IKEA just woke up one day and said, we need to build an app. They basically realized that their marketing spend wasn't working and they needed to get more people to know about their products. And one of the complaints that they heard was it was too far to get to an IKEA store. So they came up with the idea of let's give an app where someone could visualize the couch or chair in their house. And this has dramatically improved their bottom line. And so they diverted money from marketing and put it into the app. So even if you're in a physical product, product-led growth could still work for you. So last thing I'm going to cover is how do you do product-led growth? So let's say you're not doing it today, or if you're not sure if you're doing it right today, I'm going to give you the 6 easy steps to get into product-led growth. So the first step is you have to find a way to make either your product or your service accessible to as many people as possible, either free or low cost. If you sell physical products, then that might be the IKEA example by making an app to show the products. At Amplitude, this is how we do it. We give, as I mentioned, 80% of the people who use our analytics product for mobile apps, it's free. So you go, you sign up, and you get a little bit of code, throw it in your app. So making it free and easy is really powerful, and you need to make the onboarding experience easy if you're in B2B. If you're in B2C, there's not as much onboarding. Now, once you do that, it is critical that you understand how people are using your app. This is why Amplitude, we're big believers in product-led growth because it serves our interest too, because the more you do product-led growth, the more you need to listen to those customer signals through the data. So you need to track what are the top events and things that people are doing within your app to see if it's meeting your expectations. So for example, in the Starbucks example, one of their KPIs is going to be downloads, but the other is how often are people saving their favorite coffee. So that's the event that they might care about. And some people you may hear talk about North Star metrics, which might be a combination of a couple events, but you need to figure out the couple events that they are doing that are indicating that they are having success in your app. Now, as I mentioned, it's hard to figure out what your correct metric is or event, and it really is different for every app. So you have to kind of think about it, but you want to think about what are the things you want them to do most often, what are the things that you care about as a company, and what makes your app or your product different from the competitors. So that's the second step, is really kind of figuring out that event. Now in Amplitude, we struggled with this because we're like, what is like our event that we care about? We're an analytics provider for B2B. We actually figured out that if we had companies that were using our analytics product every day, we thought for sure, well, the more they use us daily, the more that means they're going to never leave us, and we were completely wrong. That was not correlated with attrition or churn. What actually was more highly correlated was if people did analytics in our product and they shared it with one of their coworkers, that turned out to be the magic bullet for us. So we created our North Star metric, which we called weekly learning users. And you become a weekly learning user if you do an analysis and you share it with 1 or 2 people at your company. People who did that, those companies never left Amplitude. It's the lone gunman who is using our product. Even if they use it every day, eventually they didn't get stickiness within the organization. And then when budgets got cut, we got cut. So it's really important that you define your critical events, your North Star metrics, and we have whole guides that we'll walk you through on our website about how to do that. The next thing you need to do is to figure out your intervals. You need to figure out how often does it make sense for your customers to come back and use your app. If you're a tax app, it may only be once a year, and it may be really depressing that you get people once and they don't come back for another 9 or 10 months, but that's your interval. But if you are Twitter, you probably want them to use your app every hour or every day. So it depends on your app and its business. Like the gentleman before was speaking from Nude. That might be more of kind of a once a week, once a month interval. So you have to kind of figure this out. Now, my rule of thumb, there's no perfect way to do this, but my rule of thumb that we use is take your main event, look at your audience and see how long it takes them to do that event the second time. And if that's like 20 days on average, then use the 80-20 rule and basically make that your interval. And you'll evolve it over time. And one of the cool things is like if you use products like ours, like we actually show you what your product your interval should be. But that's good enough for now. Now, step 5 is now you've got to start focusing on retention. Because it's great that you get people to use your app, but if they don't keep coming back over and over, you're going to be in trouble. If you see this line here, if this line continually goes down, you're always going to have drop off. When people use your app, they're not going to come back all the time. But you have to get to the point where it flattens. Otherwise, you're going to be in trouble and your app is going to be going nowhere fast. So you have to figure out, how do we get people back? Well, this is critical because we see over and over again that I think 3/4 of the time that people try an app, they give up after a couple days. So that means you got to give them value right away, something super tangible. It's also getting a heck of a lot more expensive to find new people, new customers, because the prices just keep going up for all marketing. And it's so much more expensive to get new customers than to retain your current ones. So you want to make sure you're retaining them. So what you have to do is you have to look at the data of people using your app and check out your active user trend. Not just your users, but active users, people who are actively using the product and doing the things you want them to do. Now, active users get split up into a couple different buckets. You've got your new users, then you've got your kind of current users who have been using your product for a while pretty consistently. But then you have the sad world where you've got your churned users, and then if you do a good job, you can actually resurrect churned users. And so if you're in marketing, this is something you've only dabbled with, but in the product world, this is really important to understand your mix. So like in our product, we have a particular report that shows you this over time where you can see your churn, your current, your retained, and so on. And this is something you really have to watch if you want to be in the world of product-led growth, because if you're churning too much or if you're not resurrecting enough, you can get yourself in real trouble. Now, the last step is to basically use, and this is the hardest step of them all, is to collect all of this data, all the listening that you're doing about your customers using your app. You need to do experimentation. You need to try new features, even get rid of features if there's features that are getting in the way. You need to do testing, test everything, try something and see if that makes you more viral and so on. Listen to the data, turn it into customer insights, turn that into new features or removals of features if you're creating too much friction. Then hopefully you get more people coming, retaining, engaging, and then this loop should, in a perfect world, end up with your product or your app just getting better and better over time. And the better your app gets by using the data, the more viral you're going to get, and all of that loop that we talked about is going to persist. So it sounds much easier than it is, but it is a 6-step process, and it takes time and effort. And my advice to you all is to just think about, as marketers, is your company even talking about product-led growth? Or are you just kind of being a little bit lazy and buying your customers with cash? So the way I'll kind of leave it with you is covering the things that I tried to cover here is marketing is becoming increasingly difficult because it's hard to market to people who don't want to be marketed to. And cookie deletion GDPR is making it super difficult to get new customers. Consumers have more power than ever, whether they're B2C in the Starbucks example or B2B in the Slack and Calendly example. They are telling companies what products to use, and on the consumer side, users are deciding what apps they want to use, and so they have the power now. Product-led growth is impacting both B2B and B2C, and it's starting to really cut into marketing budgets, and it's determining which apps make it and which apps don't. You as an organization should be having hard conversations with your product team and your marketing team to say, what is our mix for marketing spend, sales spend, and product-led growth? And should we be spending a little more on product-led growth? Because if you don't, you could miss out and your competitors can come out. One small example, I used to work with a company called Adobe in this product called Adobe Analytics, and we were a completely sales-driven, non-product-led growth company. And then Google came out with a free Google Analytics product, and we lost 75% of our customers. Now, we didn't lose the big super enterprise ones, but product-led growth kicked our ass. And if you don't take this seriously, you can be in trouble with your competitors. And lastly, keep in mind, as I mentioned, that these investments that you're going to get are going to slowly start shifting from marketing into product. And it's better that you and the marketing team and the product team start collaborating together and figure out that mix than just get blindsided and find yourself out of a job one day when product-led growth kind of takes over. So that's all I have for you. I want to leave a couple minutes in case you had any questions. I know I covered quite a lot, but that's just the way I roll. If you have questions or want to ping me individually, you can connect to me on LinkedIn. And then we have a microphone here when one of my colleagues here if you have any questions, I'll just say thank you in advance in case you need to run to go to another session, but thank you so much, and I'll stick around for questions for a couple minutes. And one last thing, if you want to learn more about product-led growth and product analytics, we do have a massive booth up there where all the food is, so please stop by. We have some awesome white papers that talk all about this, and like I said, we offer our product to free to most apps. So definitely check it out, win some prizes up there. So check out our booth before you leave today. Question?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I think it's mainly just for the recording, so. Yeah.
Firstly, great presentation, really inspiring.
Thank you.
I can really see the logic in this. I think it's something that clearly we should all be aspiring to. A lot of the examples you've given are, I would say, universally demanded products. So BP is oil, yep, and petrol. So who doesn't need that? Calendly, who doesn't need to organize their schedule, etc. Slack, who doesn't need to communicate at work?
Yep.
So I run an app company called Zigzag. It's puppy training. I'll summarize ourselves as the Duolingo. Well, we have the aspiration to be the Duolingo, yep, of puppy training, take you through those first 1 or 2 years of puppyhood. For our marketing, we are focused on a particular window, right? So it means not everyone has a puppy. You may have many dog owners, but not everyone has a puppy at that certain time. So one of the challenges that we face is how to create that growth loop when it's not necessarily relevant to everyone at that particular moment. Yeah. Do you have any good examples of companies that have done that well, where they have a particular niche or window that they're after?
Yeah, and it's hard. And I will say, product-led growth doesn't work for every single business. I was in Berlin this week, and someone said, we sell used electric vehicle cars in Sweden. How do we do product-led growth? And I was telling her, I said, what you could do though is you could say anyone who's selling an electric car right now in your app, you could have them put something on their car, like a QR code, and people take pictures of it to like see it right away, pick the car they want in the future, have a contest and so on. In your case, I'd have to learn more about your app and business, but it could be, you could become like a portal for the dog, puppy community. You could find, a newsletter or something. It doesn't always have to be physical. It could be some sort of a service you're providing that gets you goodwill with that audience so that when they ever do need your product, you're there. Yeah, so I'd have to, it's always hard because I always need to think a little bit to kind of learn your business model, but I would just challenge you to always say, how can we deliver value? Like I'll tell you, I was in consulting for 10 years around analytics, and I wrote really extensive, really detailed blog posts that took a lot of my time. Now, I didn't get paid for that, but eventually people would read these blog posts, and then when they needed help, they would think of me, and they would call me, and then they would pay me lots of money to help them with consulting. So a lot of times it's how much you give for free to then get back later. But the more niche your business, the harder it is. But I'm happy to chat afterwards. We can brainstorm a little bit.
Super, thank you.
We are designing a product, well, we have designed a product, which is, it's an EV roaming app. And at the moment, a lot of people don't have EVs, and it's an emerging market. Are there any kind of hints and tips that you would give companies who work in kind of emerging markets and need to be like a huge kind of step ahead of the curve in general?
Yeah, and I think your challenge is similar to his. But like I would say, one thing I would think about, because I have an EV in, now I moved to Europe now, so I have an EV, but it's actually in the States. But one of the challenges with EVs is feeling like you can't take road trips because you're worried you're gonna run out of energy. So what I would do if I were in your shoes is I would, whether it's through blogs, website, or within the app, I would come up with an app that shows trips you can do across different countries, and say, like, specifically, you know that you can get from point A to point B with these charging stations, and basically say, if you want to see this, this, and this, basically, here's an itinerary. And you could then show them the cool things they could do in that city, and you then eventually, like, you're almost their travel guide, but you're their EV travel guide. And then that might be a reason for them to download your app and then use you to, and again, I don't know if you monetize through ads or how you do, but whatever it is, so again, we could talk offline, but that might be an example, because take a pain point and a value. What value providing is you're making it easy for me to know that I'm gonna be able to see these things and not be stuck on the side of the road and have to call a tow truck. Cool. Okay, well, I'll stick around for a couple minutes, but thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and please come check out our Amplitude booth.